YouTubers, and welcome to another Doctor Who action figure review. In today's review we're going to be looking at the latest Underground Toys Forbidden Planet exclusive, which is the Daemons set. Now, much like with the Claws of Axos set, this set was due for release last year. However, due to a factory error, the set was delayed until now. So, was the set worth the wait? Well, let's take a look. The figures come packaged in a window box that features the familiar classic series design. The front of the box features a variety of images of the Master, the Brigadier and Bach, and both sides of the box feature some more screen caps of all three characters. The back of the box features some more images of the characters inside, as well as an image of Azal, and a full biography about the episode. And the inside of the box features an image of the church from Devil's End. So let's start off by taking a look at the articulation on the Brigadier. The figure is exactly the same as the one released in the Claws of Axos set, however this time he features his peaked cap rather than his beret. So it's basically just the head that we saw in the Three Doctors version on the Claws of Axos body. As such, the articulation is exactly the same, all very standard. Articulation at the head, ball-jointed shoulders, articulation at the biceps, elbow articulation, articulation at the waist, articulation at the wrists, a T-crotch hip, so the legs can move forward and out to the sides, articulation at the thigh, and articulation at the knees. Much like with the Brigadier featured in the Claws of Axos set, the paint applications on the Brigadier's face is far more improved compared to the version seen in the Three Doctors set. The detailing on the Brigadier's peaked cap seems relatively unchanged from what was featured in the Three Doctors version. Unfortunately, mine did come with a slight quality control issue that no one could really see inside the box as it was at the back, which was a bit of glue, and it seems to be some form of paint off of something has got stuck to the glue. And you can even see here slight glisten of where the glue is dried. Obviously there must have just been a bit too much glue for the cap and it just went everywhere. An easy fix, I'll probably just repaint that. As mentioned in my Claws of Axos set review, I really like the detailing on this, the texture of the jumper, the detailing of the elbow pads, and the smaller details of the holster, the buckles on the back and the front of the belt, as well as the badges featured on the Brigadier's shoulders. Much like the previous versions of the Brigadier, this variation comes with his handgun, but this time with a few extra accessories in the form of his binoculars and swagger stick. These make for some really good accessories, which also look really good displayed with the other versions of the Brigadier. The only issue with the Brigadier's binoculars, however, is that, well, he doesn't really seem to like wanting to hold them. And even if you do get him to hold them, he doesn't really seem to want to hold them in a particularly sensible fashion. I'm not sure, maybe I haven't played around with them enough to actually get it to look right, but from what I've done here, it doesn't quite work as well. And the problem is the strap around the back is so stiff that you can't really let it fall in front of him without it flicking back and smacking him in the nose. Overall, it's not a massive difference compared to the previous release, but it's still a nice variant, especially with these extra accessories. Next up, we have the Master in his ceremonial robes. Again, the articulation here is pretty much standard. Articulation at the head, which is quite hindered by his large robes. Articulation at the shoulders, which again can only go so far because of his robes. He does have articulation at the bicep, which you can actually get a bit of movement from, but again, the robes are hindering it. Articulation at the elbows, articulation at the wrists, and he does have articulation at the waist, but again, it's not really going to be doing much under here. He does have articulation at the hips, which again isn't all that useful, and articulation at the thighs and the knees. From what I can tell, most of this figure is basically the previous Master release that we saw in the first Claws of Axos set and also the Time Monster set. The head, arms and legs are exactly the same, and I think all that they've really done is removed the PVC vest piece off of the torso and replaced it with this cloak. Another thing that's different about the figure is the hands, which have been taken from the previous John Sim Master and later the Anthony Ainley Master. It would have been nice to see his hands in a different pose, maybe in that satanic hand pose that he does, but the fact that we don't have this is probably due to a costing issue. The head sculpt on the Master is exactly the same as the previous releases, however this time the paint applications have changed slightly, and I don't think it's for the better. The greys of his beard and his hair are slightly more subtle than on previous versions, which I don't think looks as good, especially when it comes to the Master's beard. Now, Roger Delgado's beard famously has 2 white streaks on either side. Here they've been so subdued that it just looks like a few grey flecks. On the back of the head, however, the grey aspects look far more prominent. It's a shame that those grey areas on his beard weren't highlighted that much more, just to make it look a little bit better. With the 2 figures side by side, you can clearly see what I mean about the beards. Personally, the version on the right definitely wins. The details on the Master's robes are really fantastic. We have some great details on the collar in the form of writing that must be some form of black magic. This has all been nicely detailed with a gold trim around the sides, as well as his medallion that hangs just beneath it. The robes have been nicely sculpted with a dark wash, which helps highlight the pattern throughout. The arm sections feature some small white triangle details, as well as some extra black trim, which has been highlighted with some gold paint. Surprisingly, the cloak is actually quite thick and heavy. This is really rock solid, and it seems that these sections are made of some really thick plastic and have been really snugly glued together, so there's really no chance of this just falling off of its own accord. The rubber here, however, is still quite soft, and although it's not really enough to actually get any movement out of it, I still think that the robes work well, and I think overall this is a really nice variant of Roger Delgado's Master. Now, last but not least, we have Bach. Bach is the only brand new figure to this set. What I mean by that is that all the other figures are variants of existing figures, but Bach is a totally new sculpt, never been seen before in the line. Now, when the images of this set were originally released, there was some debate about the size of Bach, and I'm going to be totally honest, I do think he's slightly too small, but I'll go on to that in a sec. Let's just very quickly go through the articulation. For such a small figure, he actually has quite a lot. Articulation at the head, ball-jointed shoulders, articulation at the biceps, elbow articulation, wrist articulation, articulation at the waist, and he has a V-crotch piece, which means his legs can swivel out to the side as well as pivot like so. He also has knee articulation and articulation at the ankles. So for such a diddy figure, he does have a lot going on. Now, the detailing on Bach is really, really nice. There are some nice scale-like effects around the top portion of his torso, and the rest of the figure has been given this really nice sort of granite, concrete-like feel, so it really looks like Bach is a statue, rather than some portly little chap in a pair of tights. I'm really pleased that they didn't go for a very screen-accurate version and actually did make him look like a statue. However, it does make me chuckle that they did seem to include the slight protrusion of Bach's stomach. The detail on Bach's wings is again very impressive, with some nice dark washes to help accentuate those features. Bach's tail is very much the same, made of a slightly soft rubbery plastic. It isn't going to snap, but it is still quite firm. Bach's webbed feet also features more of this stone-like design, as do the back of his hands. Bach's head sculpt is also very nice with that protruding tongue, and again the same dark washes to help give it that stone-like appearance. Now, as a figure, I think Bach is great. He looks the part, it's really nicely done, great articulation, great sculpt, great paint applications, it's a really nice figure. My only gripe is that he's just that much too short. From what I can grasp, 2 things might have happened here. One was that they decided that they'd go for a slightly smaller Bach, in order to make it seem either more like a real gargoyle, or perhaps to match some of the pictures of Bach. For instance, in this image, Bach looks really rather tiny. However, in other images where he stood next to the Master, Bach stands about here, up to the Master's shoulder. The other thing, of course, is perhaps to make this figure full scale, tooling might have been too expensive, and so they opted for a smaller version. To be honest, I think that's a bit of a stretch, and it's probably more likely the first reason. My issue with the figure of Bach isn't so much that he's too short, it's just that he's so spindly. His arms and hands just seem so small and tiny, and as much as I like the figure, although I love the figure, as a representation of Bach, I think it just comes in a bit too small. Just a little bit extra was all that was needed. Despite this, however, I am glad to see that we have Bach to add to our Doctor Who collections. It's really nice to see some more Pertwee villains being added to the shelves. Overall, I think the set's rather nice. We get a great variant of the Master, we get a nice new addition in the form of Bach, regardless of the height issues, and the variant of the Brigadier is aided by the fact that he has these extra accessories. To be honest, I think I prefer the Claws of Axos set, which surprises me because when these sets went up for pre-order, I thought it was going to be the other way around. But in hand, I think the Claws of Axos set just wins me over that much more. I think it's the Axon Man and the improved face sculpt to Joe Grant. I think this is a set that is definitely worth a look, and it is nice to have some figures from John Pertwee's favourite story as the Doctor. Thanks for watching this review, guys. I hope you found it useful. You can order these sets from Forbidden Planet International and ForbiddenPlanet.com for £29.99. Stay tuned for another review coming soon, which will be the Sound Effects Special Weapons Dalek from Remembrance of the Daleks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.